This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
I'm good. I've been wondering, are you excited for your trip to London, which starts early next week?
Yeah, so we're recording this one in advance. I forget when this one's going to go live. I think probably July 3rd. So I will have returned from London at that point. But to kick down the fourth wall, today is June 15th as we record this. So I have not even thought about London yet. I just want to get to the next 2 days and get through this week and kind of get things, buttoned up. And then I will start to think about it. But yeah, it is getting close. So I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully be able to connect with some people out in that area. I know I mentioned maybe meeting up with Andy for tea or doing a pub crawl or something like that. So we'll see.
Tea and crumpets.
Tea and crumpets. So I have not been to London proper ever. So it'll be my first time visiting the city. But yeah, I'm looking. I will be looking forward to it after I get through the next 2 days.
Well, I know you're going for the Cubs and Cardinals game. And you remember the question I asked you the first time I met you. Do you like baseball? You said no, but you like it enough to go there. You like the Cubs. And actually, the Cubs are doing pretty decent this year.
Are they?
And the Cardinals,
I should probably catch up on that.
Cardinals are one of the worst teams in baseball, and they've got some big name players. So if you had a chance to see a Cubs win,
yeah, hopefully we'll fly the big old W out there and go for it. So yeah, I'm not much of a baseball fan, but the Cubs are my team, and yeah, this is a makeup from a pandemic trip that we were planning a few years back at this point. So this is when it got rescheduled, and so we're making the trip out there to see that and do other things. So yeah, it'll be a good time. So like I said, I will be looking forward to it after I get to the next 2 days.
So we're recording an intro today. I recorded with Martin Kuppinger yesterday. He's been on the show in the past. He was on episode 106 where he gave us his origin story, how he got into IAM. So I didn't ask that question again, as per our tradition. He was also on episode 194. And then, so this will be episode, 220?
Yeah, number 220.
Yeah. The hits just keep on coming, baby.
They sure do. So yeah, unfortunately I had a late breaking meeting, and just to prove that the podcast is not our full-time job, I needed to address business first. So you were able to have the conversation. So that's good. Let's see, before we get to that conversation, well, why don't you tease, I guess, a little bit, because I have not listened to it yet. I'm going to listen to it, obviously, while I'm doing the edit for this show. But what did you guys talk about?
Yeah, so we talked about the EIC, which is the European Identity and Cloud Conference, which is hosted in Berlin. I got to watch a lot of that as it was happening from a LinkedIn perspective, and having that FOMO, or not FOMO, I guess that would be fear of missing out. I was just in regret of not being there. Really wish I could have been there, but Martin gives kind of the highlights of that. Then we just kind of I picked his brain. I mean, he's one of the big brains in our industry. So went through some various topics, got his perspective on them. Also went through a lightning round because we don't want to have 2-hour long episodes, and kind of the same thing. Then I asked him a little bit more on what's upcoming for KuppingerCole in terms of additional conferences, in terms of leadership compasses, which is the name of their market analysis reports. And I also asked them some questions about the development of those reports, and what makes a good report. What do you tell people who are new analysts working for your firm that you're looking for out of their report? And then kind of for a lighter note, we always have to finish with a little bit of a lighter note.
Okay. Which I think you guys talk about social media, or is it something else?
No, it was social media. I mean, because I wanted to get Martin's perspective on, how does he use social media? He's a LinkedIn guy. I don't know him. I wouldn't have known if he did have social media outside of LinkedIn. That's pretty much all I use. But he's pretty prolific on LinkedIn, and I've recommended going out there and following him. And then he kind of gives his perspective on what he shares.
Okay. Well, why don't we get to that conversation? Before we do that, though, just to remind people, you and I are going to be at the Authenticate conference, which is the next thing that Identity Center will officially be at. We're the official podcast for Authenticate 2023, which is very cool. I think that's the first time we can say that. Is that this is the first time we're an official anything for anything?
Yeah, right. Exactly. I think that's true. And the Authenticate conference is the FIDO Alliance conference. FIDO is like blistering hot. One of the things I realized at Identiverse is, I kind of came to the conclusion that everybody's in favor of what they do. And actually, that was the topic I brought up with Martin. Is like everybody seems to be in favor of this. What's your perspective? So he shares that. But yeah, that's going to be a great conference. It brings together a lot of the big minds in our industry. And I this is one of the topics we get into, which is, digital identity versus identity and access management. And I think identity access management was the core. The digital identity starts to get into a lot of these expanding topics. You see a lot of those conversations happening at the FIDO Alliance Authenticate conference.
Yeah, it's a great conference. It's gotten bigger and better every year. This should be the biggest and best so far. It's in Carlsbad, California, which is just north of San Diego. It's October 16th to the 18th. And we were able to score a discount code for our listeners, or anybody who really finds out about it can use it. But the code is IDAC15 podcast. So we'll have that link in our show notes for people to check that out. That's a good way to support the show. It's a great conference. It's a lot of fun. A lot of really smart people will be there. And I would say it's a more technically focused conference, especially around authentication. So if that is, your jam, come on out there and, use our code and, let us know so we can give you fist bumps of gratitude when you show up there. So anything else, or should we get to your conversation with Martin?
I think we should get to it.
Okay, let's do it. Here it is.
Good evening, Martin. How are you tonight?
Good. I had a bit of long travel into a sort of east of Munich today, but the usual stuff with the German railway. So
Were you
train
driving
driver
or?
missing and all these things that are happening every now and then with the German railway. But I arrived, and so it's fine.
I think there's this conception that in Germany you have the Autobahn, right? So if you drive from place to place, you get on the Autobahn, no speed limit, and everybody's driving, 200 kilometers an hour. Is that the way it is?
So I try to avoid driving when I can take the train, even while there are sometimes some bumpy things with the German railway. But at the end of the day, driving means a lot of queues, and the times and routes where you really can speed are relatively rare. And at the end, above a certain level of speed, it really becomes dangerous. And so I really tend to take the more relaxed train travel where you can read, where you can work, where you can relax. I believe it's more convenient, and so just last weekend I came back from France, and you're traveling rather relaxed for 8 or 9 hours or so through France, and then you come to Germany, and the traffic is way more dense. It's not very well flowing when the traffic is dense. So then the people are trying to drive fast and they have to stop again, etc. You end up in queuing. So we spent 45 minutes in a queue. We didn't have any traffic jam in France for all the time. So I think the fun of driving in Germany is massively overrated from an outside perspective. At least to my opinion. I probably get a lot of negative feedback right now from all the ones listening to this podcast that are enthusiastic drivers. But as I've said, I'm more on the public transport side, which is very good over here.
Yeah, I like taking the train as well. You also see the world, enjoy it a little bit, and get some work done, like you said. So we are recording this episode in the month of June. It's going to drop on July the 3rd. But in the month of May in Berlin, you held the EIC, which is the European Identity and Cloud Conference, right? It looked like an amazing event. I was kind of following along in my LinkedIn feed. Definitely regret missing it. Unfortunately, it's, we can only make it to so many conferences per year, and the travel from the US to Europe was prohibitive for us this year. Hopefully next year we can make it. Can you give me some of the highlights from the conference? What was it like?
Yeah, so first it was the biggest EIC ever. So we had so many people this year, way more than in the previous years. Also, a lot of people joining in virtually. We had on the first day we had a workshop where we really looked at, so to speak, all the different elements and how to sort of select what you need in identity management. And so we were three from our KuppingerCole team, KuppingerCole Analysts team, doing that workshop, and I spent more or less the entire 4 hours just responding to questions, because we had, I think, 60 or 70 or 80 online questions, which I never experienced in any of these events. So there was really a huge engagement. I learned that we had some 400 people, so 100 something in the room, and 300 or so joining virtually for this workshop. So we had a huge audience. And I think this was a cool thing at this conference, because there's a lot of interaction, a lot of discussion, aside of all the panels and presentations and keynotes. Topic-wise, I think one of the hot things definitely was decentralized identity, and more the practical use cases right now. So how to make this work. So I spent some time, for instance, talking about really enterprise use cases and the value of decentralized identity for the enterprise. I believe you can do a lot of things better in IGA, for instance, in onboarding process, but also when we did add, this was another important topic, when we go more to policy-based access, then all these VCs or proofs, these verifiable credentials or proofs, they are in fact attributes for a decision we can use in policies. I think this is a pretty cool thing. So these were some of the topics that were very hot, but as usual at EIC, there's a good mix between really fundamentals of identity management up to the very future-looking topics. So we try to cover the entire range.
What is your average level of experience for your guests who attend the conference? Are they people who are new to the industry, a couple of years, or are they people who've been in the industry for a long time?
I think it's increasingly more diverse. So in the early years, so we are running EIC since 2007. So in the early years, it was really a relatively small group of identity professionals that grew. But I would say the past 2 years after the pandemic, I've seen so many people, or I've met so many people I've never met before, that are really new to the industry, that frequently come with some experience or from other markets, from other areas, come from cybersecurity, come from other IT areas, or that are young people that are entering the market. So it really has changed. So it's not just the old IGA people that have been already working with Sun Identity Manager, but really it's a very, very mixed and very heterogeneous, very diverse group.
Yeah, that's interesting. Tell me a little bit about the expo hall, the vendor hall. I always feel like at conferences, that's such a great area to catch up with people and rekindle old relationships and make new relationships.
Yeah, so what we do is we don't have we have an expo hall, we don't have an expo hall. So what we don't have is we don't have this hall which is segregated from the rest. But for instance, in the booths, they are in the area where you also pick your food. So during the breaks, there's a lot of interaction. So people are around the different booths, etc. And I think this is something which means that there's always plenty of opportunity to talk with the vendors without extra walking into separate halls that are maybe even a bit away. So, but it's very, very cozy in that sense, so to speak. And So I think this is something which is a bit different than for several other conferences I've been at in the past.
So, in terms of speakers at the conference, did you have mostly KuppingerCole analysts, or were there other people who were also speakers at different things? I was thinking of some of the past analysts who have been on our show, includes Paul Fisher and John Tolbert. Were those folks there presenting on their areas of expertise? And then did you have other people from the outside?
And so the DIC is not a analyst-only conference with a few others talking. So we always try to have a very good mix between analysts presenting, but also analysts participating in panels. Analysts are frequently the moderators, so that they can moderate really with a big or strong knowledge about what they are moderating. But we also surely have the sponsor keynotes. We have a lot of panels with industry experts, and I think when you look at who are all speaking, them many of the well-known industry experts are there, both from the vendor side, but also from the end user side. We have end user presentations, so best practices a lot, where people talk about what they experience in making things work. So I think we have a really broad mix of different topics, and then we have a couple of tracks always running in parallel. So a lot of choice between different types of sessions.
Yeah, I really like going to the panel sessions because I know personally I prefer to participate in a panel rather than be up and be a solo speaker. I think it invites more people who would not speak to get up there and share their opinions, which kind of leads into the next question I had for you, which was, was there anything that you learned or heard that you didn't know, or maybe challenge some existing belief that you held going into the conference?
Yeah, that's always a good question. So I think I'm still learning on everything around decentralized identity because it's so much in flow. So this is definitely one of the areas where I see it is continuously evolving. Given that I spent some time in moderating the identity fabrics track, this truly was a bit more about the sort of the foundational aspects where I'm relatively familiar with. But I think that where we all, I think, need to learn a lot is, and where I tried also to educate a bit with some thoughts, is around the potential we have for policy-based access, which is, from my perspective, definitely an area of a very huge potential. What we also saw what was definitely some discussion around the upcoming eIDAS 2.0 regulation in Europe, so which is about the interoperability of eID within Europe and potentially beyond, which also relates into EU wallet projects, so also links to the decentralized identity aspects. This is definitely one of these areas which I will further analyze from where I've been. One of the subjects I will definitely take a closer look at is everything around shared signals, which goes a bit into, which is somewhere between identity and cybersecurity. So there were so many topics, and I think have quite a list of things I'd like to cover in some of my LinkedIn posts and blog posts within the next couple of weeks and months.
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend that anybody who's not following Martin right now on LinkedIn, it's something I would recommend to do.
Thank you.
Martin, I wanted to bring up a couple of hot topics in the identity space to really get your impression or your current thinking on them. And what I really want to know is, are some of these things revolutionary or evolutionary? And starting from the premise that the identity access management space, or digital identity, as I think people are calling it more now these days, we had access management, we had identity management, which later became identity governance. We had privilege access management, But now there's all these new areas. And I want to know, what your thoughts are on specifically some of these areas, whether you think they're going to have a major impact or they're going to kind of fade away. So the first
by the way,
one
I like that what you said, IAM versus digital ID, because I think digital ID is just a broader term. It covers more than the traditional identity and access management. So digital ID looks at all types of identities, looks at new use cases, a lot of things around decentralized identity. And I think this is also a reason why we see so many new people in this space, because it's growing well beyond the traditional IDOM, JML, joiner mover, lever workflow, and a bit of role management stuff.
I totally agree. I feel like the space is evolving. The name had to evolve to be more encompassing of the space and things that are coming up. And the first one I wanted to bring up, I think, is a perfect example of this, which is this concept around decentralized or user-centric identity, self-sovereign identity, whatever you want to call it, and wallets. Game changer or not? And are we looking at this actually, coming to fruition that everybody kind of starts to feel it within the next few years?
Yeah, it's definitely more on the revolutionary side. I talked a lot about, especially when I talked about the enterprise use case, and I said, in some way, it's disruptive, but it's also not disruptive. It's disruptive in the sense that it enables us to do a lot of things better and a lot of new things we couldn't do so far. And I think there will be a lot of things that we don't have on the radar yet, or most don't have on the radar yet. So that would surely go beyond the time and scope of today's call. But many years ago, probably 10, 12 years ago, we talked about something we called life management platforms, which was an idea, a concept that would allow someone to keep all the relevant things like whatever the salary statements, insurance contracts, and whatever else somewhere in the web, and control access to that. I believe with decentralized identity, we can finally realize such models, which allows us a totally different way of interaction in the internet. So there's a huge disruptive potential, but it's also non-disruptive. So a decentralized identity doesn't break the fact that a retailer has a system of records, so they have their own backend systems. At the end of the day, it still means there's Martin Kuppinger purchasing something, just that Martin Kuppinger comes in a different way. So it doesn't break the backend. And for IGA, for instance, we can use it for onboarding because we can use that verification. Then in my wallet, there's the verified credential based on a video ident, for instance, that I'm Martin Kuppinger based on my national EID card. That's very good for onboarding because it's a proof. This is Martin Kuppinger, onboarding at KuppingerCole Analysts. And this simplifies the onboarding process, which is a very costly process. When you look at onboarding processes, they are really long, cumbersome, and they cost a lot of money. We can make them more efficient without breaking the IAM system in the backend. When we then do it better, when we say, hey, we use the verified credentials for authorization because they contain a lot of information, then we sort of do the next step, because then we add a better identity management policy-based, which surely then changes a lot. But I think what we must understand is we can use it now. We can make a lot of value now without breaking everything, but we can evolve from there into areas we can't, and we are far away from today with today's technology. So in that sense, there's also a disruptive potential, and it's at the end, I think it's revolutionary.
And it feels to me like, I think in all things technology, legacy is the biggest threat to hold it back from kind of moving forward. I think in this area is probably more true than any other area.
No.
So given that, no?
Take my IGA use case. So take the onboarding process. At the end, the onboarding process means that there's Martin Kuppinger that comes in, and that may go through the HR system, or it may go directly to the IAM system. But I use the verifiable credentials, the VCs, to justify this is Martin, this is the home address, etc., etc. And this makes the process lean. And then it's in the system, and the system can continue to work as it works today. From there on, we then can gradually improve other things. But it isn't that that legacy hinders us in adapting decentralized identity. This is just not the case.
Okay. So let's move on to the next one. So I believe the explosion of the privileged access management space, when you consider solutions like KIM, CIEM, or cloud-focused solutions and tools to support DevOps, secrets management, you're looking at Paul Fisher's privileged access management leadership compass. I mean, I think there are like 30 vendors. And I listened to the podcast that Matthias does when he had Paul on, and it was like, there were still some that didn't make the cut. So it could have been many more than 30. That feels like an area that it's probably being driven largely by the cloud. But I want to get your input. Is it revolutionary, evolutionary, and where do you see this going in the next few years?
I think it is. We will see a lot of convergence here. So we have secrets management, we have KIM, and we have the areas where it's cloud infrastructure and title management, so to speak, applies as well. Dynamic workloads that run on premises on a Kubernetes environment, where we have certain but not all of the problems we have in a public cloud or a public IaaS, infrastructure as a service environment. And we have the traditional PAM. And so I believe that we will see a lot of conversion. So we will see surely several more startups appearing, but over time it will be the usual, some of the traditional vendors add capabilities, some acquire, some will remain specialist vendors on certain areas. But I think we also, from a thinking, should look at this as one big problem, which has different facets. So large complex problems best are deconstructed into smaller problems and then put together again. But there are so many overlaps that when you deconstruct it and sort of construct again, you can will find a lot of synergies and a lot of overlaps between the different areas. And so this is where I believe we will see convergence and then evolutionary or revolutionary depends probably very much on the standpoint. So when you take whatever CyberArk solution, as it has been in the past years, and they have definitely made progress since then. But when you take a traditional CyberArk install, from that perspective, this will be, so to speak, revolutionary because it's really something way bigger, very different. I think for most vendors in the space, it's evolutionary because they are already on that journey, either from the secrets or the KIM or the traditional PAM space, but they are sort of evolving their products.
Yeah, it kind of feels to me like we've got the traditional PAM vendors that have focused on the enterprise for many years, and it's now this rapidly evolving cloud infrastructure model, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, and it's creating opportunities for innovators to come in, for startup companies to come in and solve specific problems that larger firms will ultimately have to catch up to. I also think there's some new capabilities, we talk about that KIM space. To me, the biggest thing that comes out of that is identifying over-provisioned accounts. And to me, that approach has been the over-provisioned account is the account that has roles, has access assigned, and it's not using them.
Yeah.
It's not using the access.
Yeah. And by the way, that means that showcases it's not only PAM that relates to KIM, for instance. It's also IGA. Because
that's right.
What you're talking about, that is at the end, that's an access governance challenge.
That's right.
And and we see the first vendors moving from, so to speak, access governance for humans and the traditional static access to that world of systems accessing resources. So I think we will see a lot of change here, and I'm very, very convinced that neither the PAM nor the IGA market will look the same in 3 or 5 years from now.
Yeah, I've said it a few times on the podcast that I think the way that the IGA market evolves, because we kind of like point to that Gartner stopped doing their Magic Quadrant on it. In other words, the space was mature and there's not enough innovation happening in the space to keep doing a Magic Quadrant. To me, that might be true, but I feel like the definition of IGA, having one place to go to know who has access to what, it's got to be more. It's who has access to what and what are they doing with it? Or they have access to what, and is that the appropriate access, right? Are they using the access?
Yeah, you see a lot of things happening around AI, ML, whatever it is. In IHA, for instance, we see things like, also one of the topics I see, I just finalized my leadership compasses on application risk management or access control tools for SAP and for other line of business applications. So 2 separate ones, one focusing really on the SAP space, one more on heterogeneous line of business applications. That it's interesting to see that several vendors from that space are expanding into IHA, so to speak, for also the whatever sort of this traditional Azure AD, Active Directory, and so on world. But we also see IHA vendors that are shifting, like SailPoint with their ERP Maestro acquisition, shifting into the other space, the IAM space. And so IHA is not standing still. This market is still evolving. I think there will be way more evolution. There's also need for way more evolution to go more into just-in-time access, etc. But and so that's why I say it will look very differently in 3 years from now or in 5 years from now. But we need still a means to manage identities and accounts and entitlements and access. Maybe not primarily for static entitlements we push to systems via connectors, but the basic challenge, including the access governance challenge. And is it then governance for static entitlements, or is it governance for policy-based access controls to access governance? This will not go away.
Yeah, so that's the next topic that I wanted to bring it into was authorization. Authorization is now on the front page again, and I think the industry has been in love with role-based access control. It has its warts; it's not perfect, but people conceptually understand role-based access control, whereas policy-based access control is really more focused on dynamic grouping of access, dynamic grouping of users, providing them access, and expanding the data that could normally be used within a IGA or an access management tool to develop roles that would go into role-based access control. So it seems like policy-based access solves so many problems, but my concern is that it's held back by the fact that people would be nervous, not understand it, and that I think you've got another perspective also around the auditability of it.
Yeah, so I think that we need to differentiate. I think what organizations best should take is a multi-speed approach, because policy-based access for legacy applications is definitely more difficult. It's not impossible, but it's more challenging. But on the other hand, we see a strong adoption, for instance, around OPA, the Open Policy Agent. So developers of digital services love this concept because they don't want to care for authorization. They want to ask a system. They want to rely on policies. And this is facing a strong uptake. So I think it depends really on the audience, how fast it's going forward. So basically, I think as an organization, what you should do today is you should think about how can I move forward towards a policy-based access future. And, we need to be clear, this is not a new thing. Jim, you know what has been released in 1976 as a product?
What's that?
IBM RAC-F, Resource Access Control Facility. So 1976, this is 47 years ago, policy-based access control, so to speak, in some sense. And the externalization of authorization already was something that was coming into the market back then. So it's nothing fundamentally new. I think there's surely some disillusion also from XAML that was hot for a while, and it didn't become as broadly used as a lot of people expected in the industry. But I see a huge potential. I see also very, very significant benefits in policy-based access. And as I said, when you develop new applications for all the stuff you do around digital services, I think it's the logical thing to do. And then this is the fast track, so to speak. And then there's the slow track, which is modernizing your legacy, which takes longer. And in between, we're using policies for access control, for zero trust. Everywhere there are policies. So we do a lot around policy-based access already. And this is, so to speak, somewhere between the fast track and the slow track, where we have a lot of things we factually do. What we need to do is we need to combine that. We need to set up the governance. So I think the governance is definitely a very interesting point, because we have one thing where it simplifies a lot. So policy governance is a policy lifecycle. A policy governance is way, way simpler than role-based governance and role-based environments. Policies are easy to understand. You can write them in a natural language or something which is very close to natural language, and you can implement the life cycles, all that stuff, and then do simple reviews because people understand it, because it potentially are lesser policies, all good. The other point is policies make decisions based on data they receive at a certain point. That means that what we also need is we need data governance to ensure that we have the correct data we are basing our decisions on. So data governance from that perspective must be one of the next big things that are addressed.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the example I always use with the policy-based access control is, say you have data in a financial system, which is maybe your account balance. And if you're a high net worth client, you have over $1 million in assets with this firm, then you get access to a policy-based grouping or role, and you can access certain portions of an application or things like that. But that's that data. And from a data governance perspective, you need to make sure that the inputs into that data, that it's not going to be changed by some application you weren't aware of, and now all of a sudden it starts giving people access that they shouldn't have access.
Yes.
So, yeah. Now,
on the other hand, getting better than what we have today with all the static entitlements, that's not that difficult. So because at the end, when we look at what is the root cause of most of the challenges we have in identity, traditional identity management, in our static entitlements, we need these complex role concepts because we need to manage static entitlements. They get out of control. So all the recertification stuff is because of that. So some of the most painful areas you're dealing with are because of these static entitlements.
Yeah, I think that the reason role RBAC is so attractive is so many people are starting at ground zero, and it seems like such a major improvement over where they are today. They understand it, but let's move on, because I thought of this question as we were talking, and I really think that this is an area of concern for me, is that I hear a lot about the consolidation or the idea of companies kind of building a suite of IAM capabilities. So rather than I'm an IGA vendor and I continue to improve my product and build out the functionality, that I'm going to improve by also having single sign-on, by also having privileged access management. My concern is that comes at the cost of innovating within your core space, and we get less innovation in the core space, and we just get a bunch more suites. Do you think about that?
I see so many startups, and probably more startups than ever. So when we founded KuppingerCole Analysts, several people said, that is too narrow a space. So few vendors. There weren't that many identity management vendors back then. Nowadays, we have probably 10 times as many vendors as we had when we founded KuppingerCole some close to 20 years ago. So I think that means we see always startups coming up. And yes, we see vendors that go into, we provide more capabilities. I think a very fundamental difference to former days is that suites are very different than suites have been, so to speak. Usually the vendors call it platforms. You may like the term or not, but in a world where we talk about container-based deployments, where we talk about microservices, where we talk about APIs, it is that we don't talk about big monolithic systems anymore. So what happens in innovation is usually that smaller services are added that can communicate, that are integrated via dashboards and via consoles, via other abilities that have a consistent set of APIs. And that makes it simpler. And I think from a customer perspective, we introduced this concept of identity fabrics a couple of years ago. And this is not about saying I have one product, but it's about saying I have a very good understanding about which services I need, how they are provided, and how they interoperate. And this has always been based on the assumption that this goes into, or it's based on these modern architectures, based on APIs, based on microservices, based on, as I said, container-based deployments, etc. And I think in that way you can well balance these two challenges of, on one hand, saying I want innovation, I want to be able to add innovative parts into it, and it's way easier than in the past. And I think another example is I'm frequently talking with tech investors. And when I go back a couple of years, then one of the biggest concerns were that they said, okay, I have here one invested in my portfolio, I have vendor A, and I'd like to purchase vendor 2, or I'd like to acquire vendor B, but to vendor B. So I have A, I want to B. But unfortunately, my vendor A builds on Microsoft.NET, and vendor B builds on Java, for instance. And they say, oh, this is extremely complex. This is not a big issue anymore, because you say, okay, these are services that run somewhere in the cloud, that communicate via APIs. Who cares about the other part?
That's right. As long as you can maintain it. But there's also I feel like we need to, for the IAM practitioners out there, yes, everything you said is true. But I also think that we can't fall into the trap of thinking because we put something in the cloud, we've absolved ourselves of the responsibility for it being secure. Because I think ultimately the buck still stops on our plate.
You should do one of your podcasts together with my colleague Mike Small, and talk with him about tenant and provider responsibility and all these things.
I'd love to. I think that'd be a great topic. Martin, I don't want to not get through our full list here. And so what I'm going to propose is that we do a lightning round. Now, yeah. I'm going to throw a topic out there and then, take 60 seconds to 2 minutes to kind of give your thoughts on each one. So one of the topics that's been really hot, and it feels like we have unanimous opinion that this is great for the industry, is FIDO2, passkeys, WebAuthn, etc. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think passkeys are just making things more convenient for users. That's good. I think the disruptive thing is really WebAuthn, because WebAuthn means that you go from the user and the device directly to the service. You don't go through an access management system. You don't go through gateways anymore, at least not necessarily. You still potentially could use them. That means that you have potentially a couple of applications that are accessed directly. And so you need to rethink the way how you manage access and control access across these applications, where, again, policy-based access control definitely would help, but there we also have other options. But this will change a lot in the way we interact to applications and which components we use for what or need for what in our IAM infrastructure. So this has definitely a disruptive potential.
Great. Second one, it wouldn't be an IAM discussion if we didn't bring this up. Generative AI.
I've seen cool things, really cool things there. I think we are all aware of the risks that are in there. There are things that are definitely overhyped. And, imagine everyone just would use ChatGPT for creating output. Then there would be nothing new anymore, so to speak, at a certain point. If it would become a self-contained system. So there are limits, there are risks we should be aware. On the other hand, there are really extremely smart solutions I've seen based on generative AI, specifically when you combine that with, for instance, log data and security analytics, etc. So not just conversational, but really bringing in together a lot of information. Then this is something which is very helpful. I believe that, for instance, the way we are, and it's already starting, it's the way we are using search engines will change fundamentally. So the typical prompt we used, I think in whatever, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe, we won't see that anymore.
Yeah, I think, I've used the generative AI, the ChatGPT, a few times where I say, write me a summary of something, and it seems to take that something and form it into a really good search, gets the data back, and then forms it as prose. I'm like, this is pretty cool. I don't know that this part is revolutionary, but I've also seen demos of where entire legal documents, at least, if you took the 80-20 rule of I'm a lawyer, I need to create this document, I put in a request for a document, it spits out 80%. Now I just have to edit and do 20%. I've made myself potentially much more productive.
Yeah. And I think that's what we should understand. It has a potential for making us more productive, if you use it the right way, it will be a journey as usual. Okay, next one.
All right, last one, orchestration.
Yeah, cool thing. We see so many good orchestration solutions nowadays, also going beyond sort of certain use cases into really more generic solutions. The one thing I'd like to bring up here is when we use all these orchestration tools, what about, for instance, staging? So development, test, production, which is still needed. What about code versioning, code in quotas? What about documentation? I started with very traditional programming languages, and I learned that we need to comment every line of code more or less, or every section of code at least. So a lot of things that are essential for development, and at the end it's development, frequently are lacking in the orchestration tools. This is what the vendors must fix. We need to, because otherwise, imagine you using the solution with these orchestration tools for a decade or so, and a lot of people have changed. Who is able to maintain it?
So I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to understand more about what's coming up for KuppingerCole. Do you have any more conferences on the horizon? Anything else this year, or are we looking at next year?
So we're currently working on launching a cyber security related conference in November, which will run in mid-November in Frankfurt, which we call Cyber Evolution. So the R could be revolution, or as revolution, or in cyber, and an evolution, where we look at different aspects of where this is evolving. Also, surely a bit the impact or the intersection between identity and cybersecurity, but also surely the impact of AI cybersecurity, but also the positively and negatively, but also some of the more down to earth subjects. So this is thing, and then surely next year early June, due to all the public holidays we have in May in Germany, early June European Identity Conference again in Berlin. Definitely the event, key event to miss, not to miss. You should be there.
Of course, we'd love to. I mentioned a few of the leadership compasses that have come out recently: the Privileged Access Management, the IGA Leadership Compass. What else has been published recently or is coming out soon?
Yeah, so I talked about the application risk or access control tools, leadership compasses, which I have been working on, which are currently in fact check. So vendor review, and we have one on software supply chain security, which is a work in progress. Attack surface management will be one of the others. A couple more. We definitely will cover some of the upcoming topics like identity threat detection response, which probably will be then out in 2024, because such a leadership compass takes its time. Yeah. I'm currently working on email security, a topic that I have to say really came back in some way. So which is a very important subject. So many different topics across identity and cybersecurity.
So you guys do the leadership compass. What other types of reports do you publish?
Yeah, so we have the executive view, which is really a product focused thing. We do leadership brief and advisory notes sometimes, which are really more conceptual. We have a platform, KC Open Select, which is growing, where customers can sort of use information we have from a leadership compass, etc., to come up with a short list of products they want to have a closer look at, which is really an online tool to support tools choice. And so these are some of the formats we are doing. We do also writing a couple of white papers together with vendors, stuff like that.
Well, I know you guys best for the leadership compass. Probably a lot of our listeners do as well. What is the secret to writing a good leadership compass? If you hire somebody new to write one, what do you tell them? What advice do you give them?
Yeah, so when someone new starts with a leadership compass, then we work with a very close mentorship, so across the entire process. So that is then always something where an experienced analyst is guiding a new analyst. What is most important? I think most important is, I would say at the end, on one hand, really thorough analysis. So really gathering a lot of data. We have these questionnaires, we do the briefings, etc. But also sort of a critical mind. So how do we rate what vendors tell us and what vendors write the questionnaire, etc.? I think this together is the secret. And I think an advantage we have in our leadership compass is that we have multiple dimensions. So we look at market and product and innovation leaders and combined leadership, and that have the spiders which go more into detail. So we take really different perspectives, which I believe is very helpful for the customer as well.
I like the breadth of the leadership compass, the number of vendor solutions that get looked at and analyzed. And I can imagine the amount of data that gets crunched to come up with a 50-page report. So what you must start with to get down to 50 pages must be immense. Martin, you've been super generous with your time today. And what I'd like to do now is to try to do our normal cadence of ending on a lighter note. And one thing I know about you is that you seem to use your social media. I follow you on LinkedIn. You use your social media very effectively. I was wondering if you could share with our listeners your strategy for using your social media.
Yeah, so first I concentrate on LinkedIn, because I think for my domain around identity and cybersecurity, this is the most relevant one. So I don't spend time on other social media channels. I think that is part of the secret. And then I've learned, we have a very, very good social media manager, Marina, and she gave me a lot of advice. And so I'm currently working. So I had a gap for a bit of a time being on vacation, but currently preparing a couple of articles and posts on different subjects, also to become a bit more continuous in what I'm covering. Then surely also replying back to comments, to questions, etc. And so I think this is basically, there's not much sort of rocket science in that. It is really, I think, sharing enough of your thoughts and also asking for feedback, asking people of what they think about it. This usually tends to trigger more discussion than in the comment section, etc. And this makes it more interactive. So this is the way I use it.
Yeah, I think that's a very conscious approach. I try to be conscious as well because I realize that sometimes if you like a message or you comment on a message, it's going to potentially end up on somebody's feed, and you don't want to waste their time by liking somebody's potentially like a graduation picture of their kid. Nothing wrong with talking about the graduation of your kid. I think that's a great life moment. Mm-hmm. That probably is more for Facebook than for LinkedIn, right? But it's a balance. I also want to like that picture because I like that person and I'm happy for them that they've reached that milestone. So I think that's a big part of it is, for me, is making sure that things that I potentially put out there are relevant to the folks that I'm connected with so that I'm not taking space on their feed with things that they don't care about, people they don't know.
Yeah, I think this is a good approach.
Just kind of final thoughts and takeaways that you might have for everyone.
Yeah, I think we touched so many topics. And I think the most important thing is probably with all this innovation happening to look at the positive potential. So not being scared by, oh, this is changing, but thinking about how can this help in what I'm doing, potentially even without breaking everything, because a lot of this innovative stuff really adds instead of breaks the things like decentralized identity. We touched this. And this is, I think, the way of thinking we should take. Looking at the potential, but not in fear of, oh, this will break everything, because it will not. It will help us to evolve identity management or digital identity, or maybe from identity management to digital identity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martin. For all of our listeners, you can visit the show on the web at idacpodcast.com and follow us at IDAC Podcast on Twitter. We also have a Mastodon set up, which is at IDAC Podcast at info.exchange, and you can connect with us on LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you on the next one.
Thank you, Jim, for inviting me.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com and find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. See you next time on Identity at the Center.